Hey James, it's Matt here from your favourite modelling channel. How you doing?
Oh, hey Matt, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. Just want to see how your Christmas was. Did you have a nice time?
Yeah, it was all right, thanks. How about you?
Yeah, it was all right. Didn't get any models this year though. I mean, I told people don't buy me anything, but I secretly hoped that they would.
That's probably a good idea. You've got loads.
I got too many. I got so many models. Did you get anything?
I got a starter set this year from Sophie.
Oh yeah, which one?
Spitfire Mark 5 new tool, I think.
Oh, is that the Airfix one?
Yes.
That's not too bad actually. Starter set though, so you know what that means. Starter set challenge.
Starter set challenge.
Starter set challenge.
Starter set challenge. Oh,
Starter set challenge.
So I've got to just
Build the kit using just what's inside the box. All right.
That sounds like
A challenge.
a challenge, a great way to pay homage and to build a starter set at the same time.
Yes, do it. I dare you. Double dare you.
Oh, well,
Let me know how you get on.
I can't turn down a dare, and I will certainly let you know, probably in the form of a video very shortly. Hi guys, and welcome back to LPG Models. In this video, as you've probably figured out, I'm going to be doing the Starter Set Challenge. Basically, you've got to build an Airfix Starter Set with pretty much what comes in the box. So that means no airbrush, no weathering supplies, and no fancy tools. So let's take a look at what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be using the Starter Set acrylic paints, a hobby knife with a 10A blade, the No. 2 Airfix or Humbrol brush, a tube of old style polycement, some 2000 grit sandpaper and some toothpicks. Okay, so there are 3 items there that are not strictly in the box. I thought a knife would be essential because I'm not going to twist the parts off the sprues. Sandpaper to give me a fighting chance when it comes to cleaning parts up, and the toothpicks are for applying glue and other miscellaneous jobs. Let's take a quick look at the paints and get stuck in. This green here is Humbrol 30, and unfortunately it has the texture of putty. This one's 33 matte black, and it looks very glossy to me. This one is 64 light grey, and it's probably the best of the bunch. And this is 106 dark grey. Oh, it's dry. Looks like I'll only be using 3 paints. Okay, so let's reconstitute some of the paints with water. All I did was add a few drops of clean tap water into the paints and mix them up. Hopefully they'll flow a bit better. But you never know, the paints are one of the biggest things I was worried about, to be honest, when doing this challenge. But we'll see how we get on. After stirring paints for what seemed a bit like an eternity, I started to remove some parts off the sprues. One strange thing I noticed when removing the parts off the sprues is that Airfix plastic here seems very tough. And surprisingly, other people who I'd spoken to who have built this kit said that their plastic was fine, so maybe I'm just being a bit fussy. Before we could get to the good old gluing stage, I had to paint the interior of the cockpit. So I bust out my now slightly thinned Humbrol 30. Even after the first brush stroke, I could tell I was going to be doing a bit of clowning around. This paint had masses of surface tension, meaning it beaded up really quickly, and combine that with being painted on unprimed plastic, I was going to have to put a bit more effort in. To try and counteract the low surface tension, I really scrubbed the paint into the model. And it kind of worked. The paint was spread around reasonably well, but it will take a few coats to build up to coverage. So here with the second coat going on, you can see things started to turn out a bit neater. I mixed some black into the green to make a slightly dark green wash for the interior. This was then cut with some water and washed around the details in the cockpit. I then used the brush to wick any excess away. I also lightened the green with the grey to add some highlight details to the spars and interior details. I then painted the instrument panel with the black. The coverage, unusual for a black paint, was fairly poor, but 2 coats did the job. Okay, it's about time to get gluing. To save using the glue straight from that massive nozzle on the tube, I squeezed some onto the protective sheet that came with the decals. I then used a toothpick to apply the glue, and I used this with every part I glued. See where I was going with those toothpicks now? Once I'd put the glue on all the mating surfaces, the parts were then pressed firmly together. Well, once I'd got them lined up anyway. This kit is quite interesting because it's been designed with fewer parts and less fiddly bits, so it is effectively a purposely designed starter set to make it easier for beginners. As you can see here, the exhaust stacks come attached to the upper cowling, which is great for avoiding that upper nose seam you often get on these kits. Strangely, I also had a very slight short shot on my wings and some strange texture, as if it had been chewed by something, especially on the wingtips. Spitfire. Silliness aside, the wings were then glued together. I had to try and make sure there were no gaps along the leading edge of the wing, as this could really affect the final outcome and look of the kit, but I do have another trick up my sleeve. But before that, let's paint a pilot, terribly, with 3 colours. To try and make it easier to paint the pilot, I based it in the grey colour. The boots were then picked out with 2 layers of black, only one's applied here, and the uniform was painted with a mix of green and black, just for some variation. To pick out the pilot and make him look really ill, I gave him a green wash to the face, just to bring out the detail. In all honesty, the brush isn't great, but it's the paint that really hindered my painting of the figure. It was just a bit coarse. But anyway, after I'd painted my fairly disrespectful depiction of an RAF fighter pilot, I put some glue on his bum and popped him in the seat. It was at this point I attached the fuselage to the wings. The fit was pretty good. There was a very small gap along the wing root, but nothing I couldn't fix. I glued on some of the other elements, and now it's time to fix some gaps. First up, I took some spare sprue and chopped it into many pieces. I didn't need tons, so I used about 5 centimeters worth of sprue. Once I'd cut up enough, this was all collected up and chucked in an old pot. And I bet a few of you can see where I'm going with this. With most of the construction complete, I could go crazy with the glue, so I poured in most of the rest of the glue into the pot with the sprue. This was then mixed up so it was all nice and thoroughly blended. The lid was then put on and this was set aside for 24 hours. The next day. And here we go, I've made my very own sprue goo using only the materials from the kit. This will work as a filler for any gaps that I've got. Using 100% the exact same brush as I showed you earlier, 100% I'm not lying to you, I promise, I painted the sprue goo into the gaps on the model. So in the wing root or any areas where the parts didn't quite glue together nice enough. This might seem unorthodox and it does take a while to dry, but effectively you're repairing any gaps with the same styrene that came with the kit. So in theory, once the glue is evaporated, it should have the same properties as the base plastic. Using my sheet of 2000 grit sandpaper, I sanded smooth any areas that I'd filled. Hopefully, leaving me with a model with no gaps and a perfect base on which to start painting. To To try and alleviate the surface tension problem I had with the paints, I sanded the entire model. I'm hoping this slightly rougher surface will help the paint stick better. And there's only one way to find out whether it's going to work or not, and that's by getting on with the painting. Well, after a repair. The Humbrol 64 was thinned with a few drops of water. This was mixed thoroughly together before I started painting the underside. As you can see, the coverage isn't amazing, but after several coats it will be okay. One thing that really worries me about these paints are leftover brush strokes, so I tried to thin them enough so they wouldn't be a problem. To try and get even coverage, I made sure all strokes followed the same direction. Let's move on to the second layer. As you can see, the paint underneath is pretty patchy, and in the end I went for 3 coats just to make sure the coverage was consistent. Because my dark grey had dried up, I needed to mix my own for the upper surface. I added about 1 drop of black to 4 drops of light grey and gave it a thorough mix. This was then carefully brushed over all of the upper surfaces in the same manner as before. And once again, it took several coats to bring it up to a decent opacity. Out of the 3 paints that I worked with, the green had the best coverage. Using the green, I carefully painted the camouflage, using the box as a guide. This was done by first painting the edges of the pattern and then infilling the rest. So overall, painting the camouflage was a fairly painless procedure. I was nicely surprised with the brush in this kit. It surprisingly held up fairly well throughout the entire painting process. By this stage the end had started curling a little bit, but it wasn't that bad and I was able to carry on painting happily. Because I had very limited colour options, the exhausts were painted with a mix of black and green. Only a touch of green just to spice the black up a bit. To make things a bit more interesting, I mixed up a very thin glaze of green and black. This was thinned with about 70% water to paint. This was then brushed around panel lines and then blended in to give the impression of shade and various overlapping panels. It's not quite the same as a nicely black based airbrushed model, but hey, I'm working with the tools I've got. I decided not to apply a wash to the model because even in the cockpit the paint went quite granular when it was over-thinned and pulled up in a certain area for a period of time. And I really wanted to avoid any paint bloopers on the exterior of this model. This method took a little while to do, and the camera really doesn't do it justice. The model in person packs a bit more punch, but hopefully you get the impression of what I'm trying to do. I used the same green and black paint mix to add some shading to the underside of the aircraft as well. The canopy framing was painted with my green colour, Humbrol 30. This doesn't have to be overly neat because I've got yet another trick up my sleeve. This is one area where the surface tension had me stressing out a bit, but to be honest the paint went down okay, so I can't grumble too much. With the paint on the canopy complete, it was time to glue the canopy into the model. This was designed in quite a clever way. You only need to glue the tab at the rear, and the canopy clicks into place, avoiding that nasty fogging you can get with this glue. I shaped one of the toothpicks with my hobby tool and used this to scrape away the excess paint on the canopy. And after a little bit of work, the canopy was nice and clean. Next up is the step that's either going to make or break this model: the decals. The thought of not using a setting solution had me a bit horrified, but I'm just going to have to grin and bear it and get on with the job. The decals were popped into some warm water for a few seconds and then placed on a paper towel. Once the excess water had wicked away, the transfers were then slid onto the surface of the model. And because I didn't have a setting solution, I had to do something a little unorthodox. Using my finger and a fair amount of pressure, I tried to press the transfers into the surface detail as best as I could. And this seemed to work okay for the most part. The roundels went down okay, but the squadron codes were a different kettle of fish. Because there's a lot more carrier film here, there's more scope for things like silvering, which usually I don't have to worry about, but it definitely poses a big threat to this build, especially if, like me, you're a bit derpy at applying the decals. The biggest problem I had with this starter set challenge was trying to blend the decals into the finish, because naturally they're quite shiny and the paint is fairly matte. So to try and get around this, I used some sandpaper dipped in water and attempted to try and sand away some of the sheen from the transfers. In theory, this was a good idea. In practice, it wasn't. Because the painted surface wasn't smooth, that meant the decals weren't smooth either, which meant the decals ended up with a patchy look, and they really let the build down. And with that step, my starter set challenge was complete. And what a challenge it was. Let's ask Matt how I got on. So Matt, now I've finished my starter set challenge, how do you think I did?
I think you did really well, James. I can see that you've done a fantastic job of finishing this build. I think you might have cheated a little bit by using a few extra tools than I did, and naturally I think that my BF109E that I did is a little bit better, but yeah, I'd say yours comes in a close second.
That's a fair shout, to be honest, Matt. Thanks anyway for looking. You've broke my heart, to be honest.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm weeping inside and outside. I think weeping inside would just be internal bleeding, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yes. You probably should go to the hospital.
And with some sound medical advice, that's my build finished. Let me know in the comments what you think. And also check out the link in the description for Matt's original starter set challenge video on his Model Minutes channel. And also, I'd like to challenge you to do your own starter set challenge. Go on, you might have a laugh. I had great fun doing this build because it was a different perspective on scale modelling to what I'm usually used to. And I really didn't know what I was going to expect when I went into this challenge. And you know what? I'm pretty pleased with the results. Yeah, there's a bit of silvering, there's some brush marks. But it was a really nice change of pace from the more intense builds that I'm used to. And sometimes you've just got to kick back and remember what this hobby's really about. And that's enjoying yourself. Anyway, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my patrons for supporting my channel. You guys are awesome and your support is much appreciated. And I'd also like to give a huge thanks to Matt from Model Minutes for helping me with the video. And of course, a big thanks to Sophie for getting me the kit for Christmas. And I'd also like to thank you for watching. Thanks guys, I'm James from LPJ Models. Thanks for watching.